Unplugged in terror at a U.S. Navy base. 3 American sailors shot dead, 8 officers injured in an attack by a radicalized Saudi officer. The Pentagon suspends training for Saudi military personnel, and the kingdom promises to crack down on radicals. But is it enough to stop future attacks? And what will it mean for U.S.-Saudi relations? And later, an American graduate student is released in a prison exchange deal with Tehran. But the family of an FBI agent held hostage in Iran for nearly 13 years is still waiting. An update on American prisoner Bob Levinson. But first, terrorism and violent extremism in 2019. Hello and welcome to Plugged In. I'm Greta Van Susteren. Islamic State may be on the run, but extremist ideology is not. After the December 6th deadly shooting on a U.S. Navy base here in Florida, the Pentagon suspended operational training for all Saudi military students. The shooting by a radicalized officer in the Saudi military has once again put the spotlight on U.S.-Saudi relations. As the U.S. Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida, struggles to recover from the deadly shooting, the Pentagon announced it is grounding hundreds of Saudi military students training in the U.S. and halted operational exercises, including firearms training. The move is part of a safety stand-down after a Saudi Air Force lieutenant shot and killed 3 people at the base December 6th.
I spoke with the King of Saudi Arabia. They are devastated.
Critics pounced on President Donald Trump's response as too sympathetic towards Saudi Arabia. Receiving earlier criticism, the president was soft on the Saudi kingdom's role in the murder of dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi last year at the Saudi consulate in Turkey.
The Trump administration went out on a limb, as you know, to push back against efforts on the Hill to restrict U.S. support for the Saudi military, primarily because of the Yemen conflict, but also because of the Jamal Khashoggi murder. And so now we have this new incident, which is going to revive all of the concerns here in this country about extremism in Saudi Arabia. How reliable is Saudi Arabia as a partner?
Analysts say it is a tough call given Saudi Arabia's large economic footprint in the region.
The key, however, is that this is an absolutely critical power in terms of its role in the global economy. It is absolutely critical to the stability of the flow of oil and gas out of the Gulf.
The Saudis are also a major buyer of U.S. military hardware and a key player in the Trump administration's efforts to counter Iran.
The reality is that if Saudi Arabia is going to continue to rely on U.S. military equipment, there are going to be Saudi military students training in the United States. There is no alternative to having them here. And so this is something that the administration is going to have to address.
The investigation into the gunman, Ahmed Mohammed al-Shamrani, continues. A Saudi government report says he may have embraced a radical ideology as early as 2015, before he came to the United States, prompting calls for tougher vetting of foreign nationals who come to the U.S. for military training. Later in the program, I will be speaking to the former U.S. Ambassador to Yemen, Gerald Firestein, who is now with the Middle East Institute. But first, let's get to the latest from VOA National Security Correspondent Jeff Selden. He has been covering the policy and security implications of the Pensacola Naval Base shooting. Jeff, thanks for joining us. And tell me just briefly, what are the facts? What happened that day?
Well, it took a lot of people by surprise, and it caused quite a bit of alarm because just a few days earlier there had been another shooting at a naval base in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And so there were lots of questions, but the call came in early in the morning and that there was a shooter on base. It appears that the suspect, the shooter, al-Shamrani, went onto the base. He brought a Glock 9mm pistol that he had bought legally through an exception because he had a Florida hunting license onto the base, went to a classroom and began shooting. 3 people were killed, another 8 were injured. Eventually he was shot and killed by a Florida deputy who had responded to the scene. And of course, a lot of work has been done by the FBI, also by the Pentagon, into what led up to this incident, because security measures have been in place for a while to prevent shootings on military bases, especially on U.S. soil. And there are concerns too, because foreign students, military students like the Saudis who are training at Naval Air Station Pensacola, are always vetted to make sure by the State Department, by the Department of Homeland Security, to make sure that they are the highest trained, most qualified students to get this type of training. So it's raised a lot of concerns.
All right, why does the U.S. have these students from Saudi Arabia, and I'll ask you if there are other countries too? Is it because the U.S. has sold military equipment to Saudi Arabia and they want to make sure that the people know how to operate like F-15s, or is it because we're worried about security?
Well, there are a couple of reasons why. One is that often at times when the U.S. sells military equipment to an ally or to another country, part of the deal includes training on that equipment. Overall, there are about 5,000 military students in the U.S. from foreign countries training at various bases, and that includes Saudi Arabia. But also the U.S. has long viewed, whether it's training in the U.S. or training overseas through the various combatant commands like AFRICOM, CENTCOM, and others, that this training is valuable to teach U.S. standards of combat to forces that the U.S. does or might work with in the future. All
right. As a consequence of the shooting, the training has now been suspended. Is it suspended only of Saudi nationals, or is it everyone? It's a foreign national.
It's only there are about 5,000 students, but only about 500, 600 Saudi students are right now not training. The stand down has been for the Saudi students only, while Saudi Arabia does some more investigation, while the FBI, which has the lead, continues to investigate this case. Other students, as of right now, as best we understand from the Pentagon, are still training. At the same time, the Pentagon has taken some additional steps. They've increased vetting for any new students that want to come train in these military programs in the U.S. They are looking more carefully at their backgrounds. They're not describing the details of how they're doing this vetting, but they're working more closely with the State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, to look at their backgrounds to make sure somebody who might be a little bit iffy doesn't get through.
There are a number of Saudi nationals on 9/11 who flew those planes. So naturally, Americans, their antenna went up and was a Saudi national. Is there something that was missed? I mean, should he have been picked up? Was he radicalized in 2015 like it was suggested? And the radicalization, would that have suggested something like this?
It's tough to say, and that's one of the things that investigators will be looking at. One of the things that was noted is that some of the intelligence firms, independent private intelligence firms, they found on his social media accounts several quotes, a last will and testament, if you will, that he posted, that included some quotes from Osama bin Laden, which raised questions. Did he have some affinity or some sort of connection to Al-Qaeda? And terrorism experts are looking at that, and it's tough to say. Could he have been motivated by just personal grievances or a sense of what he saw as an injustice by U.S. involvement elsewhere in the world? It's possible. Could he be affiliated with Al-Qaeda or even ISIS? That's possible too. What a lot of people forget is Islamic State, just as much as Al-Qaeda, will quote Osama bin Laden as a premier jihadi. So there are lots of things that they're looking at, trying to determine what exactly motivated somebody. And one thing that counterterror officials have warned for a number of years now, the time that it takes to radicalize somebody, especially if they have any inclinations, can be very, very quick. It could be that this is somebody who came over, had a little bit of a grievance toward the United States, but something happened. Maybe he was in contact with somebody. We don't know, but that pushed him over the line.
All right. You say that he posted a last will and testament and quoted Osama bin Laden. It makes a big difference in my mind whether he posted it the day before he went on the base killing people, or if he did it 6 months ago, or 3 months ago, or a year ago, when people who I assume should be protecting people here in the United States would have had time to notice.
It seems that the social media post that was found and that's been cited in the press was posted either the day before or the morning of.
So close to the incident.
Close to the incident. There was also talk that they were investigating that perhaps he had hosted a get-together with some other students and looking at films, video that's been posted online of other shootings.
In relation to the shooting when? Was that?
It would have been within the couple of days of when the shooting took place.
So perhaps. It seems to appear. So obviously, his investigation picked up steam just prior to the shooting, and it has not necessarily been. There were not a lot of clues before that.
Not necessarily. As far as we know. Again, sometimes the difficulty is that people have multiple social media accounts. They have multiple ways that they post online, various names. So you can look under somebody's own personal social media account and not find anything. They may have an alter ego and another persona online under which they're posting this. And look, if he was in contact, if anybody is in contact with other terrorist groups, cells, planners, chances are that they're trying to take some security precautions, so there could be communications that wouldn't be popping up immediately.
Briefly, what training was he getting? Was he getting training to be a pilot, and how far along was he in his training?
Don't know how far along he was in his training, although he'd been in the U.S. since about 2017, but he was getting Air Force training as part of a contingent of Saudi officers who are now confined to quarters at Naval Air Station Pensacola.
Is there an upset with Saudi Arabia because we have now suspended the training?
Look, in Congress, there have been calls for an investigation into this. There have been calls in Congress for looks at the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia. There's been a lot of lawmakers who are upset at the way that Saudi Arabia has used U.S. weapons and even U.S. guidance as it's prosecuted its war in Yemen. There have been complaints that it continues to hit civilian targets that the U.S. training is designed to help Saudi Arabia avoid. At the same time, the Secretary of Defense and even the President of the United States has said repeatedly, Saudi Arabia is a key ally with mutual interests in terms of combating terrorism, but also in terms of containing Iran. So there's a lot of push and pull in terms of the relationship with Saudi Arabia. And it looks like, from the administration's point of view, the relationship will continue for now, though there are lawmakers who are saying this needs to be looked at further.
Jeff, thank you. Jeff Selden, VOA National Security Correspondent. And Europe is not immune to extremist ideology. Just a week before the Florida attack, a 28-year-old man who received early release after having been convicted and imprisoned in 2012 for plotting to blow up the London Stock Exchange fatally stabbed 2 people and seriously injured 3 others. And it all happened near the famed London Bridge. The killer, just like his victims, had just attended a prisoner rehabilitation conference. And the killer was also wearing a fake suicide jacket. Our correspondent Henry Ridgewell reports from London.
I'm at London Bridge in the centre of the British capital, and it was here at the other end of this bridge on the 29th of November where the latest Islamist-inspired terror attack took place. Usman Khan, who had been attending a conference on prisoner rehabilitation, stabbed to death 2 young people also involved in that conference before he was overpowered by members of the public and shot dead by police. Khan had been jailed in 2012 for his part in an Al-Qaeda-inspired terror plot to recruit and train jihadis and train them in a madrasa in Pakistan to then come back to the West and carry out terror attacks here. And that really underlines the enduring threat that the security services fear terror cells based in the Middle East still pose here in Europe. There is the added fear as well that with the defeat of Islamic State in Syria, who no longer hold territory of their own, the group is looking to inspire or to direct terror attacks here in the West to avenge their defeat. But the focus here in Britain in recent years and months has been on the threat posed by far-right terrorism, particularly in the wake of some high-profile attacks. For example, the killing of Joe Cox, the MP, in 2016, just before the Brexit referendum, the attack on the synagogue in Halle in Germany, and the attack on a mosque in Christchurch as well. And there are fears that society here in Britain, at least, is taking its eye off the ball as regards to the threat posed by Islamist terrorism, which security services say still remains the dominant threat here. So it's clear that security services are having to deal with multiple threats now, not just Islamist-inspired terrorism. We are, of course, just yards as well from where the 2017 London Bridge attack took place. These bollards here on the pavement were put in place to prevent the type of vehicle attacks we saw back then. Security services also having to deal with the threat posed by far-right terrorism. And the debate fed into the election campaign in recent weeks as well, with Prime Minister Boris Johnson pledging to overhaul sentencing guidelines. The trouble is, in the case of Usman Khan, who carried out the latest attack, he was involved in rehabilitation programs to try to integrate him back into society, and yet he still carried out the attack. And that really underlines the threat that security services here in Britain and across Europe are having to deal with.
According to my next guest, dealing with elements of radical ideology while maintaining good relations with the Saudi kingdom is tough, but it's a necessary balancing act. Gerald Firestein is a former U.S. ambassador to Yemen. He was principal deputy for Near East Affairs at the U.S. State Department. And in 2016, Ambassador Firestein retired from U.S. Foreign Service and is currently senior vice president for the Middle East Institute in Washington. Ambassador Firestein, nice to see you, sir.
Pleasure to be with you.
Ambassador, how do you describe the current relationship that the United States under the Trump administration has with Saudi Arabia?
Well, it's been very close. It's been very close historically. There were some bumps in the road during the Obama administration, but the Trump administration has really gone very far to try to repair those bumps and to build a very strong relationship based on a similar outlook on the region, as well as recognition of Saudi Arabia's importance in the global economy.
It's somewhat in contrast, is it not, the Trump administration relationship with Saudi Arabia with that of Congress, because there's been a dispute over whether U.S. arms have been used to bomb civilians in Yemen, where, of course, you were the ambassador.
Right, and so there have been two big issues in the U.S.-Saudi relationship in recent years that have created problems. One, as you say, was the war in Yemen, and a sense that the Saudis have not exercised appropriate controls to ensure that there's a limitation on civilian casualties, and how they've prosecuted that war. And then the other one, of course, was the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist who was resident here in the United States, who was brutally murdered by Saudi operatives in Istanbul.
But the American citizen will pick up the paper and they'll see that 9/11, there were many Saudi nationals flying those planes. They'll read about Khashoggi, of course, the murder of that reporter. They read about what happened in Pensacola or hear about that shooting. We're selling an awful lot of arms to Saudi Arabia. They know that Congress is mad at the Trump administration or taking issue with it. How do you explain that it's important to those people reading all that, that's important that the U.S. and Saudi Arabia have a good relationship? And is it?
Well, and this has been a problem historically, that at one level, everybody understands how important Saudi Arabia is. It's the world's largest exporter of oil. The role that it plays in international energy markets is critical for the stability of the global economy, including the U.S. economy. People understand that, and yet in many ways they see Saudi Arabia as a very alien society, as a society that doesn't share very many common values with the United States, with the American people. And frankly speaking, we haven't done a very good job over the years of explaining why it is that we should develop this relationship, we should pursue this relationship with the Saudis. It's
awfully big business, these arms. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of money that they're buying, buying these weapons from the United States. We're energy independent now, so it's less of an oil dependence on Saudi Arabia. So, what about that, all the money it's spent?
Well, it's a bit of a misnomer to say that because we produce enough energy to supply ourselves that we are not still tethered to the international energy market. If there is a cutoff of Saudi oil to Japan or to Western Europe or to China, that will certainly have implications for American consumers as well. So you can't say that we're immune from problems in the global market. Beyond that, and I think part of the problem is that the American people, while they understand that there is a lot of money that changes hands, that the Saudis spend a lot of money in the United States, people aren't necessarily moved by dollar figures. They want to understand what it is that makes this a valuable partnership. What are the values that we're pursuing? What are the objectives that we're pursuing? Our national security, our policy in the region, for almost the entire period since the end of World War II has really focused on the relationship with the Saudis.
Are they honest brokers with the United States, the Saudis?
Well, they have been, for the most part. We have worked very closely with them on energy. We've worked very closely with them on some of the critical regional issues over the years. On Afghanistan, they were strong partners. In Syria, they've been good partners. And of course, with this administration, they have looked to the Saudis to be good partners also in pushing for progress on the Israeli-Palestinian account.
I can't let you leave without asking about Yemen as an aside. What's your assessment of civil war in Yemen?
Well, interestingly, I think I'm a little bit optimistic at this point in the sense that the Saudis themselves seem to have come to the conclusion that they need to figure out how to get out of this conflict. And so we've seen a couple of developments over these last couple of months. One, trying to work out an arrangement between the government, the Abdurrahman Mansour Hadi government, and some of their elements in the south, and then also the Saudis opening a dialogue with the Houthis. And both of those are good, positive signs that perhaps we're going to be seeing a political push to resolve the conflict.
And I suppose I neglected, and we're running out of time, but to mention that Saudi Arabia and the United States have a common interest in trying to contain Iran.
Absolutely.
And its devious whatever. Anyway,
Absolutely.
Ambassador, nice to see you. Thank you, sir.
It's great to see you. Thank
Gerald
you.
Firestein, Senior Vice President of the Middle East Institute. Thank you, sir.
Okay, good.
It would be next to impossible to discuss U.S. relations with Saudi Arabia without mentioning Iran, despite renewed prospects for dialogue between the United States and Iran following a surprise prisoner exchange deal. Earlier this month, one American family still waiting for the release of their loved one. It has been almost 13 years since Robert Levinson, a former federal agent, disappeared in Iran. He had traveled to Kish Island in 2007 for an investigation. Shortly after his disappearance, Iran's state-run TV confirmed Levinson had been captured by Iranian security forces. Since then, Tehran has repeatedly denied involvement in Levinson's disappearance, leading to speculation that he was either tortured or, worse, dead. U.S. officials believe Iranian intelligence officials know more than they're letting on. But despite the family's appeals for assistance from 3 different administrations, Bob Levinson's family has learned little from U.S. or Iranian officials about his whereabouts or his medical condition. His family worries he may be in poor health. If he's still alive, Bob Levinson will be 72 in March. He is now the longest-held American prisoner in Iran. Levinson's family says they have no intention of giving up. I spoke with Christine Levinson about the toll her husband's disappearance has taken on their family and more.
I've always believed since day one that Iran knows exactly where he is. There was a Press TV report in April of 2007 that indicated that he was in the hands of Iranian authorities and would be released soon. But of course, that didn't happen.
Well, it seems quite mysterious that all these years later, there's still no definitive information, but there are rewards out there for it.
Yes, yes. Several weeks ago, the Department of Justice instituted a $20 million reward for the safe return of Bob Levinson, and that's in addition to the $5 million reward that is already offered by the FBI.
He disappeared back in March of '07, and then about the day after he disappeared, there was a document that said, titled or described as an arrest order, dated March 8th, refers to a Robert Anderson. You believe that to be Bob Levinson, Robert Levinson, right?
I do.
And it said he's FBI background, maybe CIA in the document. And it says that a military prosecutor ordered his arrest, and that was the reason you conclude that is because of a handwritten reply to this arrest order. Is that correct?
Yes. We believe it indicates that the arrest document is a true document.
Then about 2 months after this arrest order from the military prosecutor, there's a document dated May 2nd, 2007, in which it appears to show a senior commander at the Kish Air Base, an Iranian military facility, asking military prosecutors what to do because Bob Levinson got sick.
Yes.
And have you seen that document?
Yes, I have.
When did you first hear about it or see it?
We received both documents at the same time in April 2010.
Then there was a proof of life.
Yes.
And when was that?
November 2010.
And was that just a photograph or did that include a video?
That included a video.
And what was said on the video? And this was your husband in English?
Yes. It was my husband asking for help and to be released, that the United States government working for them should count for something, and he needed to be released.
Since then, have you heard anything about your husband? Any indication that he's alive? Actually, coming up to October of this year, but any information of proof of life? Anyone spotted him? Anyone know anything about him?
Well, we also received 4 pictures of him in an orange jumpsuit, same type of jumpsuit they wear in Guantanamo, in this April of 2011, which would be a year after the 2 documents.
Right. And is there any reason to believe any of these documents are doctored or fake or anything? Do you have any?
No.
And that appears to be your husband to you?
Yes. We have sent messages back to the emails where these all these things came from, and we've never gotten any response. We don't know what they're looking for in order to release Bob.
Iran submitted a document to the United Nations. What was that document and what did it say?
In the United Nations, they have an investigative unit that looks into missing persons cases, detainees, various people around the world who are held by governments. We asked them to look into Bob's case. They asked Iran about it. Iran responded with the fact that they have an open case in the Revolutionary Court. And that, to me, indicates that they have him.
Is there any indication to you that he's dead or alive? Do you have any information either way?
No information either way. I went to Iran in December 2007, and they said they would investigate and let me know what they find out. And of course, they never investigated and never told me anything after I saw them.
Do they respond to any of your inquiries? Or
No.
have you tried?
Over the years, we have tried to meet with them many times. We have gone to the Iranian mission to the UN and asked them for help. We've, as I said, traveled over to Iran, and we've continued to ask what happened to Bob, both publicly and privately, and we have gotten no answers from them. They just stonewall us. They don't answer.
As the Trump administration, have they indicated interest in finding him?
Yes, they've talked to us about it. Right now, unfortunately, the relationship is not that good between the United States and Iran. It's non-existent.
And is there a way to describe, the impact on you?
The impact on me is horrible. Every day I wake up wondering where Bob is and what's happening to him. He has never had any contact with anyone, which is against all basic human rights. He's being held captive with no one to speak to. We don't know if he has running water even, or how he's living. We just know that someone knows where he is and how to get him home.
Are you convinced that our government, both of us are Americans, that our government has been straight with you?
Yes.
What do you think that the Trump administration could do?
President Trump is a deal maker, I feel like, and he has already proven that he is excellent at getting hostages released. I feel that if he works and talks to the Iranians, he can get the job done, finding out what happened to Bob and getting him home to our family.
Is there anything you want to say to the Iranian people?
I want to say to the Iranian people, please help us. I was there. I know the people are very kind. I know that the Iranian administration is are the ones who have taken Bob, and I believe that they can encourage their government to let Bob come home to his family. How would they feel if it happened to them?
Before we go, an update on a story we covered recently here on Plugged In. After elections in October, ex-Bolivian President Evo Morales fled his country of Bolivia, and now he's again on the move, this time as a refugee. Morales is now in Argentina. Argentina granted the former president of Bolivia refugee status. He had originally fled to Mexico after his surprise resignation following disputed election results. Morales' arrival in Argentina comes just days after the inauguration of Argentina's new president, Alberto Fernandez. Morales was Bolivia's first indigenous president. He served almost 14 years and was seeking a fourth term as president, despite the country's constitutionally mandated term limits. That's all the time we have for today. Stay plugged in by liking us on Facebook at Voice America. And you can also like my Facebook page at facebook.com/Greta. And do follow me on Twitter at Greta. Thank you for being plugged in.